Ireland is a land of whispers, a land where the grass does not simply grow, but shimmers with dew, as though each blade has kissed the lips of eternity. Rolling hills stretch like the body of a sleeping goddess, curving softly under veils of mist. The sea, restless and eternal, presses its voice against the cliffs, breathing salt and longing into the wind. Streams glisten as if woven from silver threads, and the forest shadows sway as if alive with secrets older than men. In such a place, the veil between this world and another is thin. Every dawn and every dusk feels like a threshold, a fleeting moment when a mortal might step beyond the limits of their own flesh and glimpse the wonder of realms untouched by time. Ireland was, and still is, a cradle of myths. Here the stories are not simply told, they live in the soil, in the stones, in the song of birds and the silence of twilight. It is within this enchanted canvas that the story of Niamh and Oisin begins, a tale not bound to any single century, for it belongs to all. It is sung in sorrow, murmured in love, whispered in longing, and it lingers like the trace of a kiss on the lips long after the lips themselves are gone. This is not a story of conquest, nor of kingdoms claimed. It is not a tale of war drums or spears shattering in rage. Instead, it is a tale of yearning, of a woman who came from beyond the sea, radiant and dangerous in her beauty, and of a man who followed the pull of her eyes into a fate he could neither resist nor escape. The air of Ireland in those times was alive with the presence of the Fianna, a band of warriors and poets who lived not only for battle, but for song, for hunting, for stories shared around a fire. Among them was Oisin, son of Fionn mac Cumhal, a man born with strength in his limbs and melody in his soul. He was both fighter and poet, his heart alive with words as much as with courage. Mortals revered him. Bards carried his verses like gifts across valleys, and the Fianna trusted his sword as much as his song. Yet for all the honor and joy of his mortal life, Oisin carried in his chest a quiet hunger, a sensation that even in his beloved Ireland something was missing, something unreachable, something just beyond the veil of this world. Perhaps it was fate that she came for him. Perhaps it was simply the weaving of threads by hands unseen. Or perhaps, as some whispered, Oisin's own longing had called her across the sea.
Niamh of the golden hair was not of mortal flesh. She was daughter of Manannán mac Lir, the sea god, and she dwelled in Tir na nOg, the land of eternal youth. In that realm, no one aged, no one died, no sorrow ever lingered longer than the sweep of a breeze. It was a kingdom of endless blossoms, of feasts where the wine never emptied, of nights where passion carried lovers into eternities without mourning. Yet even paradise is not free from yearning, and Niamh, for all her otherworldly perfection, sought a love that would blaze, fragile and mortal, against the backdrop of forever. When she beheld Oisin, whether by chance or design, she saw in him the flame she desired. The story begins with her arrival. Across the waves she rode, her horse as pale as foam, its mane glittering as though combed with starlight. She came not like a queen descending with banners, but like a vision, a shimmering impossibility that made men pause mid-breath and doubt the certainty of their eyes. When Niamh entered the world of mortals, time seemed to bend. The gulls slowed their flight. The tide halted its retreat, and the air grew thick with something too heavy for words. Those who saw her said their tongues turned to ash, for no mortal description could hold her beauty. Only Oisin, watching her approach, felt not silence but music rising within him, music that echoed the rhythm of his own blood. The introduction to their myth is not only the meeting of two figures, but the collision of two realms, the mortal and the immortal, the fleeting and the eternal, the fragile and the unbreakable. Oisin stood upon the earth, bound to the soil, to time, to death. Ním rode from across the sea, bound to the tides of eternity, untouchable by decay. The air between them sparked with paradox, and it is within this tension that their love took root. Yet before their hands even touched, before their lips ever met, the story already carried its wound. For what is eternal cannot be fully joined with what is mortal. To bind them together would mean to stretch the threads of fate until they frayed. This knowledge lingered like a shadow at the edge of their first meeting, and still, neither of them turned away. Ireland herself seemed to hold its breath. The hills leaned closer, the rivers hushed, the trees stilled. Something ancient in the soil recognized the gravity of what was unfolding. A goddess-like maiden offering her love to a man of flesh, a poet-warrior whose song would soon be drenched in both ecstasy and despair. For love in myth is never gentle. It arrives like a storm, dazzling and destructive, and the lovers who embrace it are carried far beyond the safety of their world.
This tale, then, is not merely about beauty. It is not merely about passion. It is about the cost of desire, the fragile bridge between realms, and the way longing can become a chain that binds more tightly than iron. From the moment Ním's gaze locked upon Oisín's, the course of his life was altered. His destiny was no longer his own, but intertwined with hers, caught in a web woven across oceans and centuries. In telling this story, we do not speak of heroes or villains, for there are none. Instead, we speak of inevitability. We speak of how love can lift a man to the heights of paradise, and how that same love can dash him into dust. We speak of a woman who offered the keys to eternity, and a man who accepted them, but whose heart, despite all its wonder, still longed for the touch of his homeland, the sound of familiar voices, the warmth of mortal fires. As the myth unfolds, the listener is carried between realms, from the lush and youthful halls of Tir na Nog to the crumbling mortal fields of Ireland left behind. We are shown what it means to taste eternity and yet still hunger for the fleeting, to be offered everything and still ache for what is lost. This is the essence of Ním and Oisín, a story of desire that cannot be contained, of sorrow born not from cruelty, but from the very nature of love itself. And so, before we step deeper into their journey, before we follow them into passion, paradise, and grief, we must linger here, at the threshold. The story is a promise whispered in the wind, a reminder that beauty and sorrow often walk hand in hand. The hills of Ireland remain silent witnesses to the day when a warrior poet first beheld a woman of impossible radiance. From that moment, he was no longer a man of Ireland alone, but a man caught between two worlds. The myth of Ním and Oisín is not only remembered because it is beautiful, but because it mirrors what lies in the heart of every listener, The wish to escape time, to escape loss, to hold on to love forever, and yet the knowledge that such things can never fully be. It is this paradox that makes the tale endure, that gives it its breath and its ache. It is this paradox that draws us to the story even now, across centuries, across oceans. Listen, then, and let the waves of Ireland's coast carry you. Let the grass-stained hills open like a book before your eyes. Let the sea winds whisper and the veil between worlds thin. For in this place, in this story, love will rise, shimmer, burn, and fall. And though centuries may pass, though empires may crumble, the memory of Niamh and Oisin will linger as eternal and as fleeting as a dream.
Niamh was unlike any vision mortal eyes had ever dared to hold. Her hair fell like rivers of molten gold, spilling down her shoulders in waves that caught the sun and fractured it into fire. Her skin glowed with the faint shimmer of seashells polished by endless tides, and her eyes, deep, luminous, and untamed, held both tenderness and danger, like the ocean itself. She was the daughter of Manannán mac Lir, ruler of seas beyond mortal maps, and her very presence carried the weight of eternity. To look upon Niamh was to feel the fragile thread of one's own life pulled taut, for she embodied what mortals could only dream, the untouched beauty of youth that does not fade, the allure of a moment that refuses to die. Yet she was not cold perfection. There was warmth in her smile, a sensual invitation in the curve of her lips, an unspoken promise in the way she held her gaze upon those she desired. But it was not simply beauty that defined her, it was mystery. She came across the waves not as a bride adorned for her beloved, but as a secret revealed, a breath of the other world made flesh. Around her shimmered an aura of strangeness, a subtle sense that her laughter belonged not entirely to human ears, that her sighs carried echoes of distant realms where flowers never wilted and nights stretched without end. She was radiant, yes, but her radiance was edged with something perilous, the kind of beauty that unravels certainty, the kind of allure that bends destinies. She was no maiden to be courted with songs or roses. She was the embodiment of longing itself, and she chose whom she would consume with that fire. Oisin, by contrast, was the son of earth and blood, bound to the mortal soil of Ireland. Yet he was no common man. Son of Fionn mac Cúthal, the legendary leader of the Fianna, Oisin bore in his heart the strength of a warrior and the tenderness of a poet. His limbs were carved with the grace of battles fought and hunts endured, but his soul was alive with verses, songs, and dreams. Around the fires of the Fianna his voice lifted, weaving words that made warriors weep and women lean closer, caught in the cadence of his longing. He was mortal, yes, but within him burned a fire that reached beyond his own years.
Where others drank and laughed, content in the fleeting joys of life, Oisin often lifted his gaze to the horizon. He was not restless with dissatisfaction, but stirred by a quiet yearning, as though his heart belonged to a song he had not yet heard. His strength was unquestioned, but it was his gentleness, the vulnerability in his verses that marked him apart. Women admired him, men revered him, but Oisin himself remained tethered to something invisible, something that whispered to him in the night winds and in the hush of twilight. He was both of Ireland and apart from it, rooted in its soil but longing for the vast unknown. Thus, when Nim's path crossed his, the world itself seemed to recognize the symmetry. She, eternal and radiant, sought the fragile fire of mortality. He, mortal and fleeting, yearned for something untouched by time. She was the sea, vast and unending. He was the shore, strong yet destined to erode. Together they formed a paradox too intoxicating to resist. Their first encounter unfolded as though the universe itself had scripted it in stars long before they were born. The Fina had gathered upon the green hills, their laughter carried on the wind, when the sea itself shimmered with an unearthly light. Across the waters came a white horse, its hooves striking not the waves but the very surface, as though the ocean had hardened into crystal paths for its passage. Upon the horse sat Nim, her golden hair streaming like sunlight across the sea. The Fina, brave and fierce as they were, grew hushed. Some dropped their weapons, some pressed their hands to their lips in awe, and even the boldest felt their courage falter in the presence of something so utterly beyond them. But Oisin did not tremble. Instead, he felt as though every poem he had ever spoken, every verse he had ever dreamed had been written in preparation for this moment. When his eyes met hers, the world around him dissolved. It was not a gaze of curiosity, nor one of idle amusement. It was recognition, as though she had searched across centuries of waves for this single face, and as though he had waited his whole life for this single glance. Her eyes, shimmering with the infinite depths of the otherworld, locked onto his with a hunger that was both tender and fierce. His heart surged, not with fear, but with longing, the kind that grips a man not in the flesh, but in the marrow of his bones. In that gaze, Oisin understood. This woman was no vision. She was a summons. Nim spoke, her voice soft, yet carrying across the stillness, as if the very air conspired to deliver her words. She called his name, and it was not merely a sound, but an incantation wrapping itself around his heart. The Fina watched, silent, as though rooted to the earth, unable to intervene. This was no mortal courtship. This was destiny unfurling its wings.
Oisin stepped forward, drawn as if by unseen cords. The grass bent beneath his feet, and the air around him thickened with heat. His chest rose and fell in uneven breaths.
his blood pounding with a rhythm that matched the steady crashing of waves behind her. Neem extended her hand, pale and delicate, yet strong with the certainty of eternity. He knew in that instant that to touch it would be to cross a threshold, to step into a story from which there was no return. Their fingers brushed, and the world shifted. The air smelled sharper, sweeter, filled with blossoms that had not bloomed on Irish soil for centuries. The horizon pulsed with light, and a warmth surged through Oisin's body, as though his mortal veins had tasted for the first time the wine of eternity. Yet, along with the ecstasy, came a tremor of sorrow, for in that touch he felt not only her allure, but the distance it carried. She belonged to a world beyond his, and he belonged to the fleeting earth. Still, neither pulled away. Instead, their hands clasped fully, and their eyes drank one another with a hunger that left no room for doubt. Around them, the Fianna remained frozen, witnesses to a love that was not theirs to interrupt. The sea sighed, the hills watched, and the sky grew heavy with the weight of what had begun. It was a meeting charged with inevitability, a moment where eternity kissed mortality, and the air itself trembled with desire. For Neem and Oisin, there would be no turning back. Their lives, their loves, their fates were now bound together, a braid of mortal fragility and immortal fire. And though their story would carry them to heights of bliss and depths of sorrow, at this first meeting only longing existed, longing so fierce it seemed to consume the very air around them. This is how their tale begins, not with conquest or battle, but with eyes that recognized one another across the gulf of two worlds. She, a goddess of eternal beauty, he, a man of fleeting years. She, radiant as the sea at dawn, he, tender and yearning as a poet's heart. Between them sparked the kind of desire that myths are born from, the kind that defies reason, time, and even death.
Desire is never simple. It burns, yes, but it also wounds. It illuminates, but it blinds. From the moment Oisin's hand touched Neem's, the air between them thickened with a sweetness that was as intoxicating as it was perilous. He felt himself drawn into her, not only as a man to a woman, but as a mortal to something vast and eternal. She was no fleeting blossom. She was the very garden in which blossoms never died. And yet, to reach for her meant to reach beyond the borders of his own nature, to gamble the fragile fire of his life against the endless blaze of hers. The Fianna, who had seen battles that tore kingdoms apart, knew the look in his eyes. It was not the gaze of a warrior or a comrade. It was the gaze of a man caught by desire so strong it stripped him bare of caution. They called to him, their voices urgent, pleading. "Oisin," they warned, "do not be seduced by visions. Do not abandon your people. Do not forget the soil that gave you birth. But their words, though loud, could not pierce the quiet storm rising in his chest, for Oisin had already tasted her presence, and it lingered like wine on his tongue, making all else pale. Neem, radiant and unearthly, looked upon him with a hunger of her own. She, the daughter of the sea god, had known the company of beings whose beauty rivaled stars, whose laughter echoed across eternity, yet none of them held the fragile depth of this mortal man. Oisin was fleeting, yes, but within his fleetingness lay a fire that could never exist in Tir Nog. His verses were precious, because they came from lips that would one day fall silent. His hands were tender, because they knew they would not always hold. His love, she sensed, would burn more brightly, because it was lit against the shadow of inevitable loss. She desired not simply his body, but the very mortality he carried, that exquisite fragility which made his every moment unbearably alive. And so they stood, desire pulling them together, but danger waiting in the space between. Neem extended her hand once more, her voice soft as tide foam. "Come with me." She promised him a world where sorrow would never touch him, where his youth would never fade, where every embrace would taste as new as the first. In Tir Nog, she whispered, "Love is not dulled by time, but sharpened by eternity." There, feasts overflowed, music never ceased, and passion was not bound to nights, but to endless dawns. Her words caressed his ear like silk, and Oisin felt the temptation bloom within him, warm and heavy.
Yet behind him lay Ireland. Behind him stood his father, his comrades, the Fianna, the fires they shared, the songs sung in mortal voices. Behind him lay the soil that had raised him, the forests where he had hunted, the rivers that had mirrored his face. To step upon Neve's horse, to ride across the sea into her world, was to turn his back on all of it. Desire urged him forward, loyalty pulled him back. His heart thrashed like a stag caught between hounds. The Fianna cried out again, their voices filled with both love and fear. They reminded him of his father's strength, of the battles they had fought together, of the songs that would vanish from their circle if he left. Some begged him to resist, others fell into silence, sensing already that his choice was sealed. Oisin turned his face from them, but not without pain. His breath came heavy, as though every inhale carried both Ireland's scent and Neve's. Neve, for her part, did not beg. She did not plead like mortal women might. She simply gazed upon him with the quiet certainty of eternity, as though she knew that desire, once planted, would take root in him until it consumed every hesitation. She let him feel the pull of her world in the brush of her fingertips, in the shimmer of her hair, in the warmth that radiated from her presence. She was not only offering him love, she was offering him freedom from death, freedom from sorrow, freedom from the slow fading of years. Her promise was not wrapped in words alone, but in the very aura of her being.
The conflict deepened inside him. Oisín's soul was torn in two, one half bound to the soil, the other already adrift upon Niamh's sea. He imagined himself riding with her into that golden land where blossoms never withered, where love was eternal. He imagined nights of passion unbroken by dawn, mornings where her hair spilled across him like sunlight, centuries collapsing into the rhythm of their embrace. He imagined immortality not as a curse, but as an endless feast of love. And yet, he imagined Ireland too. He imagined his father's proud gaze, the laughter of his companions, the sound of Irish rain upon his shoulders. He imagined the touch of earth beneath his fingers, rough and real. He imagined growing older, lines etching his face, but surrounded by the people who shared his mortal breath. He imagined dying with them, and in that death belonging wholly to the land that had birthed him.
This was the true tension, not between love and loyalty, but between two different kinds of eternity. Niamh offered him endless life, endless youth, endless passion. Ireland offered him belonging, memory, legacy, eternity carved not in unchanging days, but in the soil of his homeland. To choose her was to abandon them. To choose them was to abandon her. Desire became not only intoxicating, but cruel, a wine that burned the throat even as it sweetened the tongue. Niamh drew closer, her breath warm upon his cheek. "Come," she whispered again, softer this time, as if she feared to break him with urgency. Her hand pressed against his chest, feeling the rapid thunder of his heart. For a moment, Oisín closed his eyes. The world fell away. He felt her lips near his, not yet touching, but close enough that his skin tingled with fire. The temptation was unbearable. To surrender would be bliss. To resist would be torment. The Fianna's voices blurred. Ireland itself seemed to fade. There was only her breath, her warmth, her promise, and in that fragile heartbeat of hesitation, Oisín understood that he could not remain where he was. Desire had already undone him. Whether he stepped forward now or later, he would be lost to her, claimed by the tide that had come for him. When he opened his eyes again, Niamh was smiling, a smile not of triumph but of recognition, as if she too had always known the choice he would make. For though Oisín still stood upon Irish soil, he was already hers. And so the conflict of their love was sealed, a mortal man stepping toward an immortal woman, drawn by a desire that was both salvation and doom. He had not yet mounted her horse, had not yet left his people behind, but the decision was already alive within him. Desire had chosen for him, and it was a desire so fierce, so intoxicating, that it made the danger invisible, or perhaps irresistible. Their eyes lingered on one another, heavy with all that was promised and all that would be lost. It was no longer a question of if he would follow her, but when.
Tir na Nog opened before Oisín like the bloom of a flower in endless sunlight. as Neve's white horse crossed the waves and carried him beyond the mortal world, the air itself seemed to change. It grew sweeter, thick with the perfume of blossoms that never faded, with the scent of fruit so ripe it glistened with dew. The sky was not merely blue, but alive, shifting with colors that no mortal tongue could name, and the light itself touched his skin as if it were warm silk. Oisin felt his heart swell as though every beat was now twice as full, as though life itself had become too vast to contain within his chest. Here was no hunger, no aging, no sorrow. Feasts stretched upon silver tables where platters of meat and fruit never emptied, where goblets filled themselves with golden wine that tasted of laughter and moonlight. Music rang through the halls of the other world, not played by mortal hands, but by the very air, as if the wind and stars had learned to sing together. Laughter floated like songbirds, passion rose like tides, and joy had no end. Oisin, who had known the beauty of Ireland's hills and rivers, now stood in a place where beauty was not fleeting, but eternal. At the center of it all was Neve. Her golden hair shimmered in the unending dawn. Her eyes glowed brighter than the jeweled goblets that surrounded them, and her touch was fire and balm in one. When she led him through her halls, it was not as queen and subject, but as lovers entwined. Her hand slipped easily into his. Her lips sought his with an urgency that burned through centuries, and her body curled against his in nights that never ended. Their union was not quiet, but fierce, filled with the hunger of two souls that had crossed realms to meet. Oisin had known women before, but none had burned through him like this. In her embrace, time lost all meaning. Each caress felt endless, each sigh eternal, and each kiss as deep as the sea that had carried them. She was soft as silk and strong as the tide, and when their bodies moved together, it was as though the stars themselves leaned closer to witness. She was eternity embodied, yet she surrendered to him with the passion of a mortal, trembling and crying out as though she too feared the loss of a moment. In her arms, Oisin believed he had found the answer to every hunger, every yearning, every verse he had ever sung.
Together, they roamed the endless gardens of Tir na Og. Blossoms bent toward them as they passed, rivers sang beneath their feet, and every path led to delights untold. They rode through fields where white deer leapt like spirits, their antlers tipped with silver. They wandered forests where leaves glowed like emerald fire, where fruit fell heavy into their hands without effort. At night, the stars were so close that Oisin could almost reach out and touch them, and when he lay with Neem beneath their glow, he felt as if the heavens themselves wrapped them in blessing. Passion and joy mingled until they were inseparable. Days blurred into nights, nights into days, though such distinctions meant little here. In Neem's world, time was a stream that never moved, a mirror that reflected eternity upon itself. Oisin forgot the ache of hunger, the weariness of battle, the passage of years. He lived in a fever dream of ecstasy, his body alive with desire, his soul alight with poetry. When he sang now, his songs were not for the Fianna, but for Neem, verses dripping with the sweetness of her name, the curve of her smile, the softness of her skin. And she, radiant, answered not with words alone, but with the gift of her body, her laughter, her endless devotion. For a while, he believed himself whole.
But desire is a fire that never rests, and even in paradise shadows creep. Though Oesian's heart swelled with love for Neem, though every night in her arms felt like eternity's answer, a small crack began to form within him. At first it was faint, a whisper at the edge of his dreams. He would awaken from her embrace with a strange ache in his chest, a sensation he could not name. He would wander the endless gardens, and for a fleeting moment see in their blossoms the green of Ireland's hills. He would hear the music of Tir na Nog, and mistake, just for a heartbeat, the laughter of the Fianna echoing across the fields. It was longing, quiet, but insistent.
One night, after passion had left them tangled in silken sheets, Oisin turned to Niamh and whispered of Ireland. He spoke of the Fianna's laughter, of hunts through forest mist, of fires flickering against the night. He told her of his father, of voices raised in song, of rain falling cold and sharp upon his skin. His voice trembled, not with regret, but with yearning. Niamh, listening, pressed her lips to his and told him that Ireland had faded, that time had passed, that what he remembered was gone. But her words did not erase the ache in his chest. If anything, they made it sharper. The more he loved her, the deeper the paradox became. For though Niamh offered him eternity, it was Ireland that gave his love its meaning. Without the memory of mortal years, without the shadow of loss, his passion dulled into sweetness, his verses into repetition. He loved her fiercely, yet he began to feel a hunger no kiss could sate, no feast could silence. It was the hunger for belonging, for the fleeting beauty of mortality, for the home that had shaped him. Niamh felt the change in him. She sensed it in the way his eyes sometimes drifted beyond her, toward the horizon, as though he sought something he could not name. She saw it in the way his laughter faltered, in the way his songs began to carry the cadence of sorrow. Fear stirred within her, not fear of losing him to time, for here time could not touch him, but fear of losing him to memory, to longing. She pressed herself closer, gave him more of her love, more of her passion, as though her body could anchor him. She whispered promises against his skin, swore that he was hers, that eternity would heal him. And for moments it seemed enough. But longing is a tide, and tides cannot be silenced. Oisin began to dream of Ireland with a vividness that startled him. He saw the hills rolling like waves, the mist curling over rivers, the firelit faces of his comrades. He dreamed of Fionn, his father, standing proud, waiting for him. He awoke from these dreams trembling, his arms around Niamh, yet his heart far away. The paradise of Tir na Og, for all its beauty, began to feel like a gilded cage, its perfection pressing against him until it suffocated. The climax of their love had become bittersweet. Their passion still burned, but each embrace was tinged with sorrow. Oisin clung to her fiercely, knowing that part of his heart was already drifting toward Ireland. Neve held him tighter, sensing that desire, once her weapon, had turned into a knife that cut them both. They had reached the peak of ecstasy, but ecstasy cannot last, and in its shadow, longing began to whisper louder, calling Oisin back to the mortal soil that had given him life.
The day came when Oisin could no longer silence the call within him. Paradise had been sweet, intoxicating, filled with every delight the body and heart could crave. Yet the dreams of Ireland would not release him. They came more often, sharper, each one cutting deeper into his soul. He awoke from them breathless, clutching at Nim as though she were the only anchor he had left. But even in her arms the visions persisted. The rolling hills, the wild hunts, the fire-lit gatherings of the Fianna. He heard his father's laughter echo across the fields of his sleep. He smelled the sharpness of Irish rain. He saw the earth of his homeland rich and dark beneath his fingers, and he knew he could not resist it any longer. Niall saw the torment in his eyes. She had tried to soothe it with kisses, with laughter, with the endless wonders of Tir na Nog, but she knew the truth. Mortals, no matter how beloved, cannot be severed from their roots. She feared what he would ask, but she also knew that love, true love, is not chains, but sacrifice. And so when Oisin with trembling voice told her he must return to Ireland, she did not forbid him. Instead, she lowered her golden head, and a single tear slipped down her cheek, gleaming like molten amber. "I will come back to you," Oisin swore, his voice unsteady but fierce. "I only wish to see them, to walk the hills again, to hold my father in my arms. Then I will return, Niamh, I will return to you, and we will have eternity together." Her heart twisted at his words, for she knew promises made by mortals often crumble beneath the weight of fate. Yet she said nothing. She loved him too deeply to bind him against his will. Instead, she brought him once more to her white horse, the creature whose hooves struck waves as though they were solid ground. She pressed her hand to his cheek, memorizing the lines of his face, the warmth of his skin. "Remember, my love," she whispered, "you must not touch the soil of Ireland. Stay upon the horse, and you will be safe. Step upon the earth, and time will claim you." Oisin nodded, though he could not fully understand the weight of her warning. His heart beat with eagerness, with anticipation of reunion, with the ache of belonging he had carried for so long. He kissed her fiercely, tasting the salt of her tears, and then mounted the white horse. With one last look into her luminous eyes, he turned toward the sea. The horse carried him swiftly across the waves, and before long Ireland rose on the horizon. His chest swelled at the sight, and his eyes filled with tears. But as he drew nearer, a strange unease took root. The coastline seemed different, unfamiliar, as though time itself had redrawn it. Villages were gone, forests altered, rivers shifted. The land was Ireland, yet not the Ireland he had known. When at last he reached the shore, he called out for the Fianna, his voice loud and commanding, but no answer came. He rode through valleys where once his companions had hunted, but the fires were cold, the holes empty. He sought his father, Fionn, but there was no sign of him. Instead, he found strangers,
people who looked upon him with awe and fear, whispering his name as though it belonged to legend. They told him that the Fianna were no more, that centuries had passed since their deeds had been sung. The names of his companions had become echoes, their stories carried only in fragments of song. Oisin's heart shuddered. What to him had been mere years in Niamh's embrace had been centuries in Ireland. The people he loved were gone, the fires extinguished, the songs silenced. He was a man out of time, a stranger in his own land. Yet still he clung to Niamh's warning. He remained upon the horse, though grief weighed upon him like chains. He wandered the land, desperate to see even a trace of his people, to find some remnant of the Ireland he had known. His voice grew hoarse for calling their names, but the hills answered only with echoes. Then came the moment of doom. As he rode past a group of men struggling to lift a heavy stone, their cries of strain pierced his sorrow. Compassion stirred within him, the instinct of a warrior, the heart of a poet who had lived among comrades. Without thought, he leaned from the saddle to lend his strength. His hand grasped the stone, his muscles tightened, and in that instant his foot slipped. The tip of his boot touched the soil. Time, which had spared him so long, surged upon him like a storm. His hair, once dark and strong, turned white in a breath. His back bent, his limbs withered, his skin sagged and wrinkled. The strength that had carried him through battles, that had lifted lovers into his arms, crumbled like ash. In the space of a heartbeat, Oisin aged 300 years. His body, once vibrant and filled with fire, collapsed beneath the weight of centuries. The men he had sought to help stepped back in horror, watching as the great warrior poet of legend turned to frailty before their eyes.
Oisin fell to the ground, his bones brittle, his breath ragged. He cried out once for Niamh, his voice thin, desperate, breaking. But she was far across the sea, beyond his reach. His fingers clawed at the soil, not in battle, but in grief. And in the next moment, his body gave way entirely, crumbling into dust carried by the Irish wind. Niamh in Tir na Nog felt the breaking of him. She had known, deep in her soul, that this would come to pass, but the knowing did not lessen the wound. She felt his life vanish like a candle extinguished, felt the thread that bound them snap. Her cry echoed across the halls of eternity, a sound of such raw sorrow that even the immortal blossoms of her realm bent their heads in grief. She pressed her hands to her chest as though to hold together a heart that had shattered. But no embrace, no kiss, no promise could mend what was gone. Her love was trapped forever between worlds, Oisin lost to the dust of mortality, and she bound to the eternal land that could never know death, but could never grant reunion either. She had given him paradise, and he had given her passion. But in the end, time claimed them both. The land of Ireland kept the memory of Oisin. His songs lingered in echoes, his name carved into legend. But for Niamh, the memory was no echo, no story.
It was an endless ache, a wound that could not close. For what is eternity without the touch of the one you love? What is paradise when the heart is left hollow? Thus the outcome of their tale is written in sorrow. A mortal man who sought both eternity and belonging, and an immortal woman who loved him too deeply to hold him prisoner. Together they found ecstasy, and together they found ruin. Their love was both gift and curse, a flame that burned too brightly to last. And still, across the waves, when the wind carries the scent of blossoms and the sound of distant music, some say it is Neem's grief lingering on the air, a reminder that love can cross worlds, but it cannot conquer time.
Love is a paradox, and perhaps no tale makes this truth clearer than that of Neem and Oseen. For what is love but the human attempt to seize eternity with mortal hands, to press lips against the fleeting hour and beg it to linger, to entwine bodies and hearts in a vow against time itself? Yet even as love reaches upward, as it hungers for the eternal, it is time that gives it meaning. Without loss, passion is sweetness without savor. Without the shadow of death, desire burns without flame. Oseen longed for the impossible, to love forever, yet still belong to his mortal world. And Neem longed to bind him to her, to shelter him from decay, to give him youth without end. Their desires were pure, yet in their purity lay their undoing. For love that denies time becomes a dream, and dreams, no matter how sweet, cannot be held. Theirs is not simply a story of sorrow, but of truth. Each kiss they shared, each embrace, was heightened by the knowledge, unspoken yet lingering, that something in it could not last. When Oseen's eyes drifted back to Ireland, when Neem's heart tightened with fear, they lived the tension all lovers know, the wish to stay in the moment forever, and the knowledge that forever is beyond reach. Their paradise was real, yet it cracked beneath the weight of longing. What makes their myth endure is not the tragedy of its end, but the beauty of its yearning. Who among us has not wished, if only for a heartbeat, to escape the ticking of the clock? To hold a beloved so closely that time forgets to move? To live in a kiss, in a touch, in a night of passion, as though eternity itself had been captured? This longing is universal, and in Oseen and Neem it is given shape, voice, and fate. Yet the story warns as much as it consoles. For Oseen, the yearning for eternity was answered. He crossed into Tir Nanog, where time slept and blossoms never withered. But without the shadow of mortality, his love dulled, his songs grew heavy. It was not enough to live forever. He needed the fleeting pulse of his people, the touch of rain, the rhythm of passing days. Eternity gave him Neem, yet it stole from him the very soil from which his heart had grown.
And Neve, radiant daughter of the sea, learned her own truth. She could gift him paradise, but not peace. She could give him youth, but not belonging. Her love was fierce, sensual, radiant as dawn. Yet even she could not unweave the laws of existence. Love, no matter how divine, cannot stand wholly apart from time. And so she became a figure of eternal mourning, her heart a wound that could not heal, her passion turned to lament. The paradox is thus revealed. We crave eternity, but we are shaped by loss. We ache for love that endures, yet it is the very possibility of ending that makes it burn so brightly. A kiss is precious because it cannot be infinite. A touch lingers because it cannot last forever. A lover's gaze pierces the soul because we know deep inside that eyes close, that life fades, that moments slip away. To be mortal is to ache, but also to feel with a depth no eternity can match. This is why the tale lingers, why it has crossed centuries like a whisper on the wind. It is not merely a story of Ireland, nor of gods and warriors, but of us. In Neve's golden hair we see beauty that dazzles but slips beyond our grasp. In Ocean's choice we see the endless pull between what we desire and what we cannot escape. In their union we see ecstasy. In their loss we see ourselves. And so the myth endures, not as a caution alone, nor as a romance alone, but as both. It teaches us that to reach for eternity is to risk ruin, yet to refuse that reach is to deny the fire that makes us human. We are creatures of longing, bound by time, yet always dreaming of breaking free. Ocean reached and was undone. Neve gave and was left hollow. Yet in their ruin lies a beauty so piercing it outlives both of them. When the wind sweeps across Ireland's hills, carrying the scent of rain and the echo of waves, some say it is the breath of this story, still alive. When lovers cling to each other in the night and whisper promises of forever, they are echoing Ocean's vow, knowing yet refusing to know its impossibility. And when we close our eyes in the arms of another, losing ourselves for a moment in the illusion of eternity, we walk, however briefly, in Tir nan Og. The sensual and the sorrowful entwine here, inseparable. For Neve's embrace was not less tender because it could not last. It was more so. Ocean's songs were not less beautiful because they were silenced by dust. They were more so. Love's power lies not in conquering time, but in defying it, in singing louder because the silence waits, in holding tighter because the letting go will come. This is the paradox, that loss deepens love, and love makes loss unbearable.
The tale of Niamh and Oisin does not offer resolution. It leaves us suspended, like a feather caught in air, between dream and reality. It asks us to ache, to yearn, to remember that beauty is most radiant when it slips from our grasp. It tempts us with the vision of eternity, only to show us that even paradise cannot soothe the mortal heart. And yet, would we want it otherwise? Would we wish for love that never risked sorrow, for passion that never trembled at its own fragility? No, for then it would not move us. Then it would not be love.
So let this story linger in you as it has lingered in the Irish wind. Let it haunt your thoughts, the image of Niam's golden hair, of Oisin's dust scattered on the soil he longed to touch. Let it remind you the next time you kiss or hold or whisper that you are mortal, and that in mortality lies the fiercest beauty of all. For love is not eternity. Love is the fire that burns against eternity, the flame that flares knowing it will fade, the song sung louder because silence waits. Love is the ache, the longing, the trembling hand that reaches anyway. And in that reaching, in that defiance, in that surrender to both bliss and sorrow, we touch the heart of what it means to be alive. And so the myth closes not with a door, but with an open window. The breeze that carries it does not end here. It slips into your breath, into your pulse, into your memory. You are left suspended, aching, half in dream, half in waking. And if for a moment you long for eternity, if you ache with the sweet wound of desire, then you have walked beside Niam and Oisin, if only in story. And that, perhaps, is all eternity needs to be.